Hi, this is Stephanie Miller from The Stephanie Miller Show. Please enjoy this exclusive clip from my show on Political Voices Network. Obviously, we're in white knuckle period, right, Stephen, where everybody is looking at the latest polls. And, we were saying yesterday, it's so interesting because, you'll see several good polls. I saw the Morning Consult, I think yesterday, had her up by 6 points nationally, up in the swing states, etc. But there's sometimes these outliers. Mark Halperin, who... his background, but he's a right-winger, Trumper, and, I think some people, this is for clicks and ratings and where we are. He's like, oh, Kamala Harris is in a lot of trouble, but, internal polling, blah, 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 and then everyone freaks out, right, and we react to that. But you wrote a piece on the appeal of Kamala Harris, and you just made a lot of good points just based on, specific kinds of polling, right? You were saying, she's edging Trump in the latest poll you saw, 49, 46. So anywhere from 3 points, 5, 6, I've seen. You said Harris is seen as the change candidate over Trump, 46, 44. Not an easy feat, given she's the sitting vice president. You were just talking about what factors have historically mattered, right? You said she leads 49, 41 over Trump on a question of who cares about people like you. 48, 43 on who would help people like you. She dominates 48 to 37 about who's honest and trustworthy. That seems like that should be higher. Okay. Harris leads 43 to 35 on the question of who's fun. And, you were saying, like, you can dismiss that. But as you say, you think how many voters consider who they want to spend the next 4 years hanging around? Is it the grim, hateful, carnage-loving, self-absorbed Trump, or the joyful Democratic nominee who provides uplift and laughter and attracts all of the most popular musicians and other performers? I keep saying, we have a DJ at our roll call, Stephen. Come to our side. It's so much more fun. But, all these appearances she's done, they're just joyful, right? Yeah. I mean, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, look, people will say, oh, well, I need to know what her position is on this policy or that policy. And there's no question there are certain policies, abortion, reproductive rights, the economy. There may be certain very specific issues that are important to people, and that's right. But I think that when finally it comes to who do I want in the White House for the next 4 years, I think it is an emotional response. And I think she has done a brilliant job of differentiating herself from Donald Trump and making it clear, not only a joyful campaign versus one that's sort of dark and grim and carnage loving and all that. But I think in some ways it goes back to 2020, where you had it was the sociopath versus the empath.
Yeah. Well,
right? And here we are again. I think it is that same contrast, and it might be even more vivid now.
I think we can't underestimate the fatigue factor. It can't just be us that is just exhausted by Donald Trump. You hear that in even former Trump voters. You're just exhausted by his chaos and division and meanness. And, there's, Kamala Harris laughing, having a great time, having a beer with Stephen Colbert, And here's Trump first of all, he already has a huge woman problem, right? He lashed out at the hosts of The View, labeling them degenerates and dumb women. After Kamala, that'll help him with his women problem, right? After she went on the show, he tweeted, "Lion Kamala, who's being exposed as a dummy every time she does a show, just stated to the degenerates on The View that she would have done nothing different than Joe Biden, the worst president in the history of the United States. The lamestream media doesn't want to pick up the story. The dumb women on the show, they never asked her the question that led to the election-defying answer. The internet's going, what? Oh my God, he just lives in his own reality, right?
Right. Right, and the gender gap is already clear. He obviously doesn't care about changing that, and he's leaning into his hostility, his hatred toward women. And it was not only focusing on dumb Kamala Harris. He went after individual members of The View to emphasize how dumb they are too. I mean, that rings clear, I think, to most women.
He called Kamala Harris and Liz Cheney dumb. These two dumb. I mean, it's just like, your piece goes on further, Stephen. You say she strengthened her support among older voters, even some Republicans. That you point out is significant. I've heard other analysts say that the 9% of Republicans who say they plan to vote for her compared to 5% last month, and you say, I suspect that's going to continue to go up. But that's actually very significant, isn't it?
It is really significant. Republican, and obviously the endorsement by Liz Cheney, the endorsement by, Darth Vader. I mean, Dick Cheney. That means something to Republicans, and you hope that, the number of Republicans who either worked for Donald Trump or who have worked in other Republican administrations who've said this guy is a danger, he's unfit for office, he doesn't belong back in the White House. We hope that it's going to resonate with at least some slight percentage of Republicans, and that slight percentage may be just enough to A, increase turnout, and B, to be able to make those margins a little bit warmer.
Well, yeah, you'd call it permission structure. They're creating a permission structure for other Republicans to vote for Harris. You said among non-white voters, Harris is seen as the change candidate by an overwhelming margin of 61 to 29. Same is true of younger voters. They pick Harris as the change candidate 58% to 34%. So, I guess your conclusion is we can win this. I mean, I was just talking to Dr. Redlener, though, Stephen. We were saying about how many hundreds of national security experts, economists, scientists, doctor. I mean, how many people, all the former people that worked for Trump, warning. Yeah. You just wonder how wholesale a rejection of any kind of experts, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well,
are his cult going to reject? I mean, we were talking about this poor guy that wouldn't take FEMA money, whose house was destroyed because he said, "Oh, I hear they're going to seize your house if I take FEMA money." First of all, he believed they were giving his FEMA money to illegal immigrants, and then when they offered it to him, he said, "Oh no, you're going to use that to seize my house because Donald Trump said so," right?
Yeah. It's exhausting. I mean, people are tired of the chaos and the conflict. I think majority and maybe a large majority are exhausted by it. But the repetition of these lies, and particularly, I'm particularly stunned that that it's this close. But more than that, the repetition of his hatred for so-called illegal immigrants is the thing that no matter what the issue is, it always turns back onto that group as the scapegoat for all the country's problems. And, I think decent people, obviously there's a percentage of people who are strengthened by their, freedom to be a bigot. But I think Donald Trump is not going to expand his voting public by this constant hateful barrage.
Well, yeah, and by the way, excuse me, you raised a good point in terms of lying about the disaster relief. You said if Trump is already causing this much damage and chaos to people in places hard hit by natural disaster now, imagine how much more damage and chaos he's going to create if he's actually responsible for managing the response. And we did already see it. We saw it out here in California with the wildfires. People in Puerto Rico saw it. Yeah. Imagine how much more partisan and vindictive he's going to be, right?
Yeah, well, we saw it with COVID in terms of who got the tests and who didn't, right? Who got the masks
Putin
and
did.
Who didn't. Yeah, Putin did.
Yeah.
So friends win. Anybody who's not a friend is an enemy and will lose in this scenario. And that portends a very dark future.
And I also keep making the point, as you do, Stephen, that it's the whole party. You said we have 1 month to combat this egregious disinformation campaign. If the Republicans are lying this aggressively now, we can be sure they'll expand it with increasing zeal if they retake our White House and control the Senate again. I mean, I was just saying, and this is not the first time they've politicized disaster relief. They routinely vote against relief for blue states while begging for it for their red states, right?
Right. And, we used to, as a country, come together on things like natural disasters, right? The kind of events that we're all in together against sort of a larger power that we all are just trying to find a way to help our neighbors. And what do we have? We have, a major party nominee who's using it, exploiting it for political gain, and essentially abusing people who are trying to recover in many cases from a terrible disaster. It's shameful.
They punished one of their own. We keep saying all morning, Stephen, Christie, for even deigning to take a picture with President Obama and work together to help his constituents during Hurricane Sandy. I mean, it was Lord of the Flies over there. They were about to kill Piggy with a rock just for taking a picture with the black guy. I mean,
it is a little bit encouraging that at least like the Georgia governor Brian Kemp and some other Republicans have been pushing back against this. They at least recognize that that kowtowing to Donald Trump is not as important as actually trying to serve their electorate.
Yeah. Well, it just the cognitive dissonance. You said the same people who deny climate change now say the Democrats control the weather. I mean, it just. But then you're right. Even those few Republicans, Stephen, become rhinos or establishment or they're. I don't. Go ahead.
If it is this full of disinformation and hostility to the public and people's ability to know what's right and wrong and true and false, factual reality, which is really important in a democracy when we're making decisions as part of a shared government, self-governance. It's going to be a lot worse after November 5th if this guy gets back into office.
Yeah.
So to me, that's at least part of the message that people need to be telling to their friends and their neighbors and strangers that they bump into and anybody that they can between now and
right. And by the way,
5th.
While we welcome the late to the party New York Times and Bob Woodward. Thanks for coming when people are already voting. You said we need
He could have done this like 6 months ago when he started on the book. How about that?
You said we need aggressive journalism, not anticipatory obedience from the mainstream media. Here. And also just your last one, the cowardly Trump who refused to go on 60 Minutes, attacking Harris for her comments on 60 Minutes is not the own he thinks it is. I mean, once again, we're in uncharted territory where he's going to just sit in the peanut gallery and heckle her, and he's not held to any standard. Doesn't have to debate again, doesn't have to do any serious interviews at all, right? Because and that's a huge story. We've never had a campaign where they're clearly so afraid of their candidate's mental, cognitive decline, whatever. They're not going to allow him in any forum before the election.
Well, if you go back to 2016, right, the major media would not say that he lied, right? Lying was just not a word that was used. We've evolved a little bit from, possibly committing a falsehood and, all the other ways of soft pedaling. But this many years later, almost a decade later, and you have too many members of the media who have not figured out that there's one legitimate candidate who's interested in governance and democracy, the democratic system, and another one that's interested in throwing it all away by any means necessary. And, that requires a different response. And too many people still are normalizing this guy and essentially adapting to the reality of Donald Trump as if it's, we should just, calculate it as sort of part of the equation.
Yeah, they think we need to bend to his reality, which is not reality.
Right. So, it's a lot of work every day to not let him and his enablers to degrade our capacity to know what's true and false and right and wrong. But that's the everyday work. It's that we do. Right, those of us who have a platform, but I think everyone needs to do to, make sure you have this kind of critical eye, a critical mindset to what you're hearing and what you're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. Stephen, great stuff as always. Come back soon.
Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. I hope you'll join me on my new audio podcast, Justice Matters. I'll be using my 30 years as a federal prosecutor and Army JAG to unpack, break down, and explain the legal issues of the day, particularly where the legal intersects with the political. Please look for Justice Matters with Glenn Kirshner wherever you generally get your podcasts.